The letter arrived on a bright afternoon, stamped with urgency and authority. By sunset, the peace Daniel had built over 15 quiet years felt like it was slipping through his fingers. It claimed his solar panels violated neighborhood aesthetics and demanded immediate removal, or daily fines would begin. Daniel stood on his driveway staring up at the sleek panels glinting in the sun, panels he had installed to cut rising energy costs and leave something better for his daughter's future. The neighborhood had praised sustainability in newsletters and meetings. Yet now the HOA board, led by its rigid president, Eleanor Briggs, insisted the panels were visually disruptive. Neighbors peeked through curtains but avoided eye contact. No one wanted trouble. Daniel felt the isolation settle in. He attended the next HOA meeting, hopeful for compromise. Eleanor listened with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. She cited bylaws, property harmony, and community image. When he mentioned environmental benefits, she dismissed them as irrelevant to neighborhood standards. The room stayed silent. Walking home beneath the fading orange sky, Daniel realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. He looked up at the panels catching the last light of day and made a quiet decision. If they wanted compliance, they would have to force it, and he suspected this fight was only beginning. By morning, the official violation notice was taped to Daniel's front door like a warning. The deadline, 10 days. The fines, steep enough to break him if ignored. He reread the HOA bylaws line by line, searching for clarity. Buried in legal language, he found references to visible structural additions, but nothing explicitly banning solar panels. The ambiguity felt intentional, a rule designed to be interpreted by whoever held power. Daniel requested a review hearing. Eleanor granted it, but her tone suggested the outcome had already been decided. Meanwhile, utility bills climbed, and his daughter Maya asked why he looked worried all the time. He told her adults sometimes disagreed about rules. She simply said, "But the sun is free, right?" Her innocence made the conflict feel heavier. Days passed with quiet tension. A neighbor whispered that Eleanor had opposed panels before, claiming they ruined property values. Another admitted he wanted solar too but feared retaliation. At sunset, the panels shimmered across Daniel's roof like mirrors catching fire. He noticed something then, the angle of the light, the reflection bouncing toward Eleanor's second-story windows across the cul-de-sac. It was faint. Harmless, but it gave him an idea, and for the first time since the letter arrived, Daniel felt a sense of control returning. Daniel spent the weekend researching reflective angles, sunlight paths, and mounting adjustments. He wasn't planning sabotage, only optimization. Solar panels function best when aligned precisely with the sun's arc. That alignment, he discovered, could also redirect excess glare. On Monday, certified installers adjusted the tilt by a few degrees for efficiency improvements. The change complied fully with energy guidelines and city ordinances. No rule prohibited sunlight. That afternoon, Eleanor sat in her upstairs office reviewing paperwork when a burst of light flashed across her wall. She pulled the curtains shut, irritated. Across the street, Daniel watched the panels gleam like polished glass. The reflection wasn't constant, only when the sun hit at certain hours. Brief. Legal. Unpreventable. Within days, Eleanor sent another notice accusing him of creating a nuisance. Daniel responded with documentation showing the adjustment improved energy performance and complied with all regulations. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting. Neighbors began noticing the midday sparkle lighting Eleanor's windows like a silent signal. No one said it aloud, but tension shifted. For once, the authority figure seemed inconvenienced rather than the homeowner. Daniel wasn't seeking revenge. He wanted fairness, but he also understood something important: rules enforced without reason often collapse under their own weight. And the next meeting would test exactly how strong those rules really were. The emergency HOA meeting drew the largest attendance Daniel had ever seen. Residents filled folding chairs and lined the walls, whispering with cautious curiosity. Eleanor opened with practiced composure, describing light disturbances affecting her property and claiming Daniel had intentionally redirected glare. Her words were careful, but frustration edged her voice. Daniel waited until invited to speak. He presented energy efficiency reports, installer certifications, and city compliance documents. The adjustment, he explained, reduced power loss and aligned with renewable energy standards encouraged by state policy. A murmur moved through the room. One board member asked whether sunlight reflection could legally be considered a nuisance. No one had a clear answer. Another neighbor raised her hand, admitting she appreciated the neighborhood's push toward sustainability. A retired engineer added that reflective glare from windows in cars was common and unavoidable. Eleanor's expression tightened. The discussion shifted from Daniel's panels to broader HOA authority. Residents began questioning vague bylaws and inconsistent enforcement. Daniel realized the issue had grown beyond his roof. It was now about fairness for everyone living under the same rules. As the meeting adjourned without a decision, Eleanor avoided his gaze. Outside, the late sun cast long golden beams across the quiet street, and for the first time, Daniel sensed the balance of power beginning to tilt. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. Neighbors started talking openly. Conversations that once took place behind closed doors now unfolded on sidewalks and driveways. A young couple asked Daniel about installation costs. An older resident confessed she had removed panels years ago after pressure from the HOA. Another neighbor admitted he feared fines more than he trusted the rules. The sunlight continued its brief daily reflection into Eleanor's windows. It wasn't constant, but it was impossible to ignore. Eleanor responded by keeping her curtains drawn, a small but visible concession. Meanwhile, Daniel received a certified letter from the HOA's legal consultant requesting mediation. The tone had shifted from demands to negotiation. At mediation, Daniel remained calm. He didn't seek conflict or compensation. He asked for clear guidelines permitting solar panels and protections against selective enforcement. The consultant nodded, noting state renewable energy protections that could override restrictive HOA policies. The realization hung in the room. The association risked legal exposure if it continued. That evening, Daniel sat on his porch watching the sun dip low, its light soft and warm rather than harsh. He hadn't set out to challenge authority, he had simply refused to surrender reason. And soon, the neighborhood would feel the effects of that decision. 2 weeks later, the HOA announced a special vote to revise architectural guidelines. The proposal would formally permit solar installations and require consistent enforcement of all exterior modifications. Attendance doubled. Eleanor delivered the announcement with professional restraint, though the strain showed in her voice. The glare still visited her office each afternoon, a silent reminder of unintended consequences. Residents spoke with new confidence. They discussed energy savings, environmental responsibility, and property rights. What once felt like a forbidden topic now sounded practical and forward-thinking. When ballots were counted, the measure passed overwhelmingly. Applause filled the room, not triumphant, but relieved. Afterward, Eleanor approached Daniel privately. She admitted she had feared rapid changes might lower home values. Daniel explained rising energy costs were already shaping buyer priorities. Sustainability wasn't a threat, it was the future. For a moment, the tension dissolved into mutual understanding. That evening, the sun reflected once more across her windows. She didn't close the curtains this time. Instead, she watched the light soften into dusk. The neighborhood had not fractured, it had evolved, and Daniel sensed the final chapter of this conflict was approaching, one shaped not by victory, but by unexpected transformation. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood looked subtly different. New panels appeared on rooftops, catching sunlight like quiet symbols of progress. Conversations shifted from complaints to savings, efficiency, and shared responsibility. Daniel's energy bills dropped, easing a burden he had carried silently for years. Maya proudly told friends her house ran on sunshine, and neighbors smiled rather than looked away. One afternoon, Eleanor knocked on Daniel's door. She wasn't there with notices or bylaws. She carried a folder of solar proposals and asked which installer he trusted. He walked her through the basics, explaining placement, permits, and incentives. She listened carefully, taking notes. As the sun dipped westward, the familiar reflection shimmered briefly across her windows, softer now, almost symbolic. What began as a conflict rooted in control had ended in understanding. The panels remained, the rules evolved, and the neighborhood grew stronger through a challenge no one had expected. Daniel looked across the quiet street, realizing that standing his ground hadn't divided the community, it had illuminated a better path forward, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.